All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. I know we may have a few people coming in a little late. Totally fine. This will be recorded for you. Just to give a brief introduction, this is our college planning webinar all about understanding the financial aid process. My name is Lauren Russo. I'm a financial advisor with Berkshire Money Management. That is me on the screen, and actually sitting with Nicole DuPont's daughter, Anna. Nicole is our marketing and community outreach specialist, and her daughter is actually a college student right now, so very appropriate. So I am here with my colleague, Jared Reinstein. Jared, do you want to unmute and just say hello?
Good evening, everyone. You're in for a special treat tonight.
We had a little bit of technical difficulty, as we tend to do. So for some reason, Jared was unable to share his camera with the way we have Zoom set up. So I apologize, you won't get to see his beautiful face, but I will be here as well. All right, so we are both running this webinar for all of you, right? Parents, guardians, families of college-bound children. Our goal for this hour is to help you start thinking about the sometimes overwhelming yet critical process of applying for financial aid. This is an important first step in a new and exciting journey for you and your student. We'll be happy to answer any questions that you have at the end of the presentation. So just on that note, a couple housekeeping items. First, as I did mention, this will be recorded, so it will be sent out to anybody that registered afterwards. Should be coming out later this week. Also, it will be on our social media pages and likely on our website and YouTube as well. We have the Q&A feature on the Zoom webinar, also the chat, so feel free to type in any comments, questions, and I did mention someone wrote in the chat feature they were hoping to learn a bit more about the different lingo that the colleges use when talking about financial aid. So if there's any point where Jared or I start speaking in that lingo and we confuse you completely, please pop in that chat or the Q&A and let us know. We will be happy to take a step back and explain anything further. All right, so this here is our team, including the latest employee of the month, Dexter. Some of you may know him. He is the furry one in the tie down in the front. He has the employee of the month plaque up in Zach's office, his dad. So we here at Berkshire Money Management provide you the comfort of being a full scope financial services firm. Our team has the ability to better your path to financial independence by aiding you in not only college planning, as we'll be talking about today, but also investment management, financial planning, estate planning techniques, tax planning, as well as helping business owners to create their succession plans. On this slide, you'll see our contact information should any of you want to reach out to set something up and discuss a little bit about how college planning or any of our other services might help you and your family. All right, so at Berkshire Money Management, we use a comprehensive college planning software called College Aid Pro to help you and our clients to maximize financial aid. Now, you all know it's a very complicated topic. There's a lot of pieces to it. So this software helps you to research and compare college costs and financial aid opportunities. Also track applications and awards. So this screenshot that you see here is just an image of what your parent portal would look like. So essentially you can compare all different types of colleges, whether it's a state school, private school, whatever your student is interested in, and see what is the actual cost going to look like for our family, right? Because every school and every family is different, as you all likely know. So later on in the presentation, we are going to go through a couple of comparisons between schools that will just help to show kind of how we use this data and what we can do with this tool. A little background on Jared and I. So these are our pictures. There's his face, even though his camera's not on. So we're both financial advisors, as I said, here with Berkshire Money Management. We work on our advising team and planning team to help to enhance the experience for our clients. And the key word here is team. We really pride ourselves on synergy and collaboration in order to be the best fiduciaries possible. Now there, I did it, right? Fiduciary. How many of you have heard of that term? Maybe some, but probably the minority, I would imagine. And that's what's expected. So essentially what that means by saying we are fiduciaries is that we are obligated to put your needs before ours. So that means that we're going to make any type of conflict of interest known. We're not going to recommend anything that is not in your best interest. So we're not in it to make commissions or anything like that. That's not how we work. We are a fiduciary. We're simply looking out for your best interests. If anyone has other questions about that, I don't want to bore everybody with the details, but I'm happy to go into more detail if you'd like. And so step one of understanding the financial aid process, evaluating your need. Need, right? It's a simple word, but we're going to dive into what that really means when we're talking about the context of college and financial aid. Before you can start applying for financial aid, you need to determine your family's need. So how much financial aid your family is going to qualify for based on your particular situation. So here's a simple formula. In a nutshell, right, this explains what need is and how the particular school is going to determine whether you're eligible and how much you're eligible for. So you take the cost of attendance of the school, subtract your expected family contribution. That's a term we'll break down in the next slide. So the cost minus what you as a family are expected to contribute equals your need. So what determines that need? What goes into that? There's two main areas, the cost of attendance and expected family contribution. The cost of attendance is fairly straightforward, simply the cost of tuition, books, room and board, dining, etc. And if you think your teenager eats a lot at home, just wait till you see the cost of a meal plan. Yeah, they're pricey, but I will just throw in a little plug. As a UMass Amherst graduate, I would say their #1 dining is probably worth the cost. If there's any other alumni on here, I'd be curious to see if you had the same experience I did, but your child will thank you for that unlimited meal plan if they're going there. All right, and then moving on to the right side of the screen, expected family contribution. You may hear this as EFC, an acronym. We'll call it expected family contribution. So this is simply a net worth statement for that family, essentially. So every college is going to be different, but parents and guardians are going to have to be ready to show all financial information, including the student's assets, for these financial aid forms. All of this information determines the need, but having different options, doing some research, and understanding these options will allow parents and guardians, as well as their students, to make informed decisions. Now, just to make things a little bit more complicated, that EFC, expected family contribution, for some reason they are changing the term. So if you see student aid index or SAI on any financial aid forms, I know you might not remember this, but if you see SAI, remember that is the same as this expected family contribution. All that number is simply what you are expected to contribute in the eyes of that school. So just a quick example. Let's say your child is considering 3 schools, not local to the Berkshires. Let's say Miami University, Ohio State University, and UNC, University of North Carolina. Miami's their top choice. Miami might not offer a lot of need-based aid for the student, but on the other hand, Ohio State offers more along with scholarships, grants, and other funding options. This is the big conversation that you need to have with your child. Is the student loan debt worth that burden? Is it worth going to the school that's going to give you more aid? And what does that look like for your family? And we'll say this multiple times throughout this presentation, but every school is truly different. Their formulas vary. The way that the type of information that they require from you will vary. So every school is going to be different, and that's why it's so important to look at things ahead of time, as a lot of you guys are, clearly, if you're sitting here at this presentation. So planning ahead of time allows you to think about all of these variables and features of financial aid and make an educated decision. So what should we know about our family contribution? As far as the assets considered for that expected family contribution, there's going to be two different parts of this. So the FAFSA form has their own determination. And then, as I said, specific colleges have different criteria for determining this number that varies by school. They may ask you for additional and much more specific information that the FAFSA does not require. We'll get into that a little bit later. I saw a question pop in, so just pause. Melissa asked, is EFC determined by each individual school? So yes, you will get when you submit the FAFSA, so that's the general financial aid form, you will get an EFC number. And it's complicated, right? But the EFC number is the number given by the FAFSA. And then each school, so I'll just go back a few slides. So the cost of attendance is going to be different, and the way that they view your expected family contribution is going to be different. So how they calculate your need, and I know this is a little bit confusing to explain in a presentation like this, but the way they calculate your need is going to vary by school. So the need is really what the school is going to give you and what you're going to pay for that school. So that's going to vary by school. The expected family contribution is produced by the FAFSA, which is just one standard form. So a bit of a convoluted answer there. I apologize for that. Just to mention, if there's anything that is particular to your specific situation that you'd like to dive into, we will be offering a free 20-minute consultation for everybody attending this webinar. So we'll be sending out a follow-up email in the coming days with a link to set that up if you're interested. So moving forward, just a couple of common questions. So what is considered an asset? Short answer, everything other than your retirement accounts. Yet again, varies by school and also by the type of financial aid form you need to submit. So most schools require the FAFSA, which you're familiar with. Other schools require additional forms as well, which may view your assets a little bit differently. Just to, again, complicate things further, right? They don't make it easy on you. So when we look at assets, parent assets are factored into the expected family contribution formula at a lower rate than student assets. So student assets are weighted more heavily in this formula, meaning if your student has a lot of money saved up, which is a wonderful thing, right? Good for them, but that will influence their financial aid. The money in the student's account is going to be weighted heavier than money in the parent's account. So if it's in the student's name, it counts more against your financial aid. So the more assets that you have, and particularly the more assets that your student has, the more they will expect you to be able to contribute towards school. So that's that EFC, right? They're assuming you can afford to contribute a given percentage of your assets and income. the more assets you have, the more they think you can contribute. Whether or not that's the case for you, they don't know that, and they don't necessarily consider that. They simply look at the numbers and come up with their formulas that way. So when we talk about assets, like I said, it's pretty much everything other than retirement accounts. Those are excluded. So checking and savings accounts, yes, possibly equity in your home, investment accounts, CDs, other asset accounts. Like I said, it's more advantageous to have assets in the parent or guardian's name as opposed to the student at most schools. So we can absolutely explore the assets in your particular situation more in a one-on-one consultation. Questions like, does it make sense to move things around or spend down certain assets? There's no solid answer. It really depends on your situation, your circumstances. So as much as I would like to give you a solid, tip to move your accounts or rename something, it is very much individualized to a particular person or family's situation. So is debt considered? This is a nice, quick and easy one. Debt is not considered in the need determination. So essentially, if you have a lot of debt, meaning that your cash flow is not great, unfortunately, colleges don't really take that into account in their formula. However, you may have the opportunity to appeal your financial aid letter with the school by explaining your debt situation and providing proof, right? So you can't make anything up. Of course, you need to have evidence and show the financial hardship or whatever you are dealing with, present it to the school and negotiate a better financial aid package. So in short, debt is not considered, but you can go back to the school and essentially ask them to consider it. There's no guarantee as to whether or not that is going to result in more aid or not, but it is always absolutely worth a shot to submit an appeal on the financial aid. How should we value our home? So I mentioned home equity is often looked at for financial aid. So you're going to hear us saying this in your dreams after this, but remember, every school is different. So some schools are going to consider 100% of the equity, some 0%, and others anywhere in between. So going back to the formula of how they calculate your expected contribution, depending on the school, they may or may not count your home equity, and they may or may not count all of it or a portion of it. Most schools will have this available on their websites. However, it's usually not, right there in bold print at the top of the screen, but it's information that they have. You just have to know to look for it. But yeah, every school is going to be a bit different on how they look at home equity. And these resources on the screen just show you a few places to go and read a little bit more about that. So you don't need to write down, the value of your home on Zillow today, right down to the penny, but it needs to be accurate and reasonable. All right, so on to income. What income do colleges consider? One of the tricky parts of the financial aid process is the look back for tax returns. So the financial aid formulas look back at what they call the prior year's tax return. So 2 years back. They use the adjusted gross income. So if you are interested, that is line 7 on the tax return. Also, if you have other children in college, the family contribution will be split, which could be to your benefit. However, this consideration is going to be eliminated coming up in the 2024-2025 school year and beyond. So that means that right now, up until the 2024-25 school year, if you have more than one student in school right now, they're splitting that need number, your family contribution, between however many students. So if you have 2 kids in college, they are assuming that your finances are going towards both of them. But coming up in these next few years, that is going to be going away. I wish I had better news to say about that, but all I know as of right now is that is going to be fading away. One thing to be aware on this screen, so students have an income allowance. Right now, it is $6,420. You don't need to remember that number, but just be aware that your child can make up to that amount before their income starts being assessed for financial aid. And just to give a sort of an example of that prior year concept. So you can see here that the class of 2022, so our current high school seniors who are in the midst of FAFSA season right now, they have to show tax returns from 2020. So that's a 2-year look back. One thing to kind of keep in mind with this, so if you had more income in one year than in others, your family's need for that 1 year may be reduced. So for example, let's say you made more in 2021 than you did in 2020 or 2022. So your calculated need for that 2023 school year that looks at the 21 tax return, it's going to be lower, which can decrease the amount of aid that you're eligible to receive. So long story short, your financial aid is recalculated each year based on your tax return as of 2 years prior. Super straightforward, right? So a common misconception is that aid is aid. So what they give you is what they give you year after year, but you have to actually resubmit these financial aid formula or applications and forms each year, and they will reevaluate the number each year. And step 2, identify financial aid resources. I will mute myself and I'll hand it on over to Jared.
Thanks, Lauren. Just give me a quick test. Can you hear me okay? Okay. All right. So what we're going to do right now is start looking at the different types of aid for college. And I'll do my best to break down any jargon or lingo that goes with it. As Lauren said earlier, we do try our best to speak human here. So when we're looking at the first type of aid, we're going to be looking at need-based financial aid. And simply enough, one of the most popular forms of this are federal student loans. Now, the biggest kicker with these is there are limits to how much you can receive and apply for every year. And the biggest thing is it is not going to fully cover the cost of college for student loans in general, or for the total cost of college, if the loans themselves will be the primary source of funding. So this is a big discussion when it comes to how are you paying for college, whether it's going to be out of pocket with loans, hopefully scholarships, which we'll get into in a minute. But simply enough, the federal student loan discussion is something that needs to be of presence, and that is certainly something Lauren and I can help with. There are benefits to federal student loans. Simply enough, if you're going into the public sector to work, whether you're a teacher, you work for the government, perhaps nurses, there is potentially the ability to have those loans forgiven down the road. And again, that depends on the career path that the student chooses. The next piece under student loans are Parent Plus loans. These loans are taken out in the parent's name or the guardian's name, not the student. The amount awarded is based on the cost of attendance minus any financial assistance the child receives. So putting the loan in the parent's name does have pros and cons to it, but it's really up to the parent or guardian to weigh those pros and cons before considering this type of loan. And lastly, under federal, we have Pell Grants. These are offered to students who display exceptional financial need, but the amounts do change annually. So for example, in 2021 and 2022, the maximum award was just around $6,500. Again, this helps, but it will most likely only cover a small percentage of the total cost, depending on where the student goes. And as far as state programs, this is really going to depend on the state. Some states offer programs for in-state residents, which might impact the decision you have with your child about staying in-state versus attending an out-of-state school. One thing we're not going to touch on right now, which is a whole other animal, are private student loans. And that is certainly a discussion that Lauren and I can have with you to explain how student loans will affect college in general. So if we look at a case study, we're going to look at two colleges from a need-based aid platform. We have Amherst College and UMass. You can see the significant difference between the cost of attendance with the two colleges. Amherst showing you $75,000. And then we have UMass Amherst showing a cost of attendance of $28,000. We both have an expected family contribution of $15,000. Do the simple math. We have a need of $60,000 for Amherst and a $13,000 need for UMass. Well, if we dive into that a little deeper, Amherst is willing to offer $60,000 for a financial aid package. Amherst UMass, not so much, $3,900 plus self-help aid, giving you a grand total of $7,800. Well, that's a significant difference. So if we look at the total cost of college over 4 years, we're looking at $15,000 a year cost for Amherst College versus $24,000 for UMass Amherst. And you can see the difference is $60,000 versus $96,000. So over 4 years, you can see that Amherst itself, the cost of attendance was a lot more than UMass Amherst, but because the need package was more generous for the child, it costs less to go to a more expensive school. Now, this was the financial aid-based need. What we're going to talk about on the next slide is merit-based financial aid. Simply enough, this is going to be awarded directly by colleges to the student who do not qualify for the need-based aid. These can include scholarships, grants, awards. They can go to athletes, students with high academic achievements, students who want to specialize in degrees. Merit aid differs obviously from school to school, which is crucial for the decision on where the child should go. And it's imperative you have that discussion. Not all schools will offer this type of aid. Ivy Leagues and a lot of colleges in the New England Small College Athletic Conference do not give merit awards. And obviously, as we said, this is going to be very college specific. So a case study, and one of the great things our software does, as Lauren brought up earlier, College Aid Pro, it gives great examples and dives deep into the comparisons of the cost of college versus the aid that would be needed from a financial aid standpoint and a merit-based aid standpoint. So in this example, we have two colleges, Trinity and RPI, both pretty high in cost, $75,000 for Trinity, $65,000 for RPI. And the expected contribution for the family is going to be the same, $75,000, generating $0 in need. When we look at the packages offered, though, Trinity not willing to offer anything. RPI is willing to offer $30,000 in a merit-based type of package. So when we look at the total cost of college, Trinity is looking at $75,000 a year or $300,000 total, RPI is looking at half of that because of the merit-based aid that was offered to them. Seeing a comparison like this can help you with your child make the college selection process easier. And again, when we look at the ability to utilize a specific software to go through these different variables, that's where you can see the true value of what college planning is. One of the unique ways to look at schools is something called a value school. Now, when you think of the term value, you think of what can I get that's great quality for a great price? Well, value schools are simply that. They're going to be schools that have exceptional academic histories and achievements, where the cost is considered quote unquote value worthy, and they're great options to look at if there's no need-based aid available. So an example of a value school could be James Madison in Virginia, ranked in the top 5% of schools nationwide. Cost of attendance is $40,000 a year, roughly. And there's also some great state colleges that have these honors programs, whether you're living in Massachusetts, for example, or even I live in New York. There are some great SUNY schools that offer very high quality academics for great prices. Lauren, I'm going to throw it back over to you to discuss the different ways to apply for aid.
All right, thanks, Sharon. Yeah, those examples are very enlightening, right? To see two schools that may be viewed very similarly, but the costs can vary dramatically. So now we get into step 3, actually applying for aid. This is the fun part. So it can be a very daunting process, absolutely, but it's an important step in this college planning process, and we're here to help. How do I apply for financial aid? As we've been saying throughout this webinar, every college will dictate their own deadlines, their own formulas, and their own communication methods. Once you narrow down a school or a list of schools, be sure to know the main contacts, the departments for that college, and whether or not they require specific financial aid forms. So I mentioned this earlier that most schools require the FAFSA, while others require additional forms. So some schools require the CSS Profile. CSS stands for College Scholarship Service. We'll talk about this a little bit more later on, so don't worry about that yet. So some schools require both of those forms. Some require even further your tax returns, additional account statements and documents as well. So just be prepared for that and make sure that you and your student are doing the proper research and you're aware of what's required for that given school. And I just want to emphasize the bullet point in the middle here. So most colleges are not proactive and sometimes only communicate with the students. That means they're not going to be emailing the parents or calling the parents on the home phone. They're going to be emailing the student and uploading information in the student portal. So that means you need to keep reminding your child, your student, to check their email, check those portals. The school is not going to reach out through Snapchat or Instagram to tell them they're missing a document. So it's just important for the students to be aware of that, and also for the parents to be aware of that, so you can continue to give them the nudge if they need it. So the FAFSA, this stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. You may be familiar with it. You may have filled it out yourself or for other children or family members. But if you are new to it, it is, well, even if you're not new to it, it's probably still quite overwhelming. So we'll go over the basics here. So start, you go to fafsa.gov. Make sure you are at the proper website. You always want it to be .gov. It is accessible on October 1st of 2021. So you have until the end of, I believe it's the end of June of this year to get everything in. to submit this form. Just a reminder that you will need to submit it each year. Again, as we talked about earlier, they use the prior year. So you'll be looking back 2 years for income. And regarding assets, those are as of the date you're filing. So income is the prior year. Asset values are as of the date you file the FAFSA. And I will just state this last bullet point here. Deadlines are paramount. It is very important to get this in as soon as possible. Some financial aid that's given by the schools is actually first come, first serve. So the earlier you get in your financial aid forms, the earlier the school has your information, and the earlier they'll be able to tell you what your financial aid award package looks like. And even further, the earlier you can go back to the school and appeal or negotiate that financial aid package. So for the FAFSA, each student is going to need to create a Federal Student Aid ID, FSA ID. So each student and at least one parent has to create one. Essentially, that's just creating your username and password to access the FAFSA form. So it is required for the student and at least one parent or guardian. So before I jumped into FAFSA, I have mentioned this CSS profile a few times. So this just adds another fun layer of complexity to an already complex process within need-based aid. So the CSS profile is similar to the FAFSA. It's not quite as widely used as of right now. About 400 private schools require this additional application. That list does appear to be growing though, so it's definitely something to keep on your radar. There's a fee to apply as it states here on the screen, whereas the FAFSA is free. So it's not quite as widely used, the CSS profile, but it is more invasive. So there are a lot more questions that they ask of you, a lot more information that's required. Just be aware whether or not the school that your child is considering requires this form, and if so, be prepared to set aside some time to complete it. So while not every school requires the CSS profile, it may be a determining factor in what college you and your student decide on, especially if you don't want to go through the process of submitting an additional form. Also, home equity is treated as a liquid asset. So we talked about home equity earlier and how the FAFSA does not assess home equity when they calculate financial aid, your financial need. But the CSS profile, on the other hand, which again, not every school requires this form, but the list of schools that do is growing. So these schools do assess home equity. So if your home has a high value and your equity is high, perhaps this could be the determining factor in whether your student goes to the school that requires this form. Because if we're throwing in an additional X amount of dollars of home equity as an asset for your family, that means that your need is changing, right? So they're going to assume you can afford to pay more towards school. Even though, that might not be the case for you, that is how these formulas work. So it's just important to know if the school your child's interested in requires this CSS profile, they will likely be assessing home equity and they will be asking a lot more questions than that FAFSA. So again, just for you guys to all be prepared. And just a note on divorced or separated parents. So non-custodial parent typically needs to fill out the CSS profile. However, if you have the case where the child has no contact with that non-custodial parent, there is an option to fill out a waiver request form. That way you can leave that parent off of the profile. And yet again, that is up to the specific college, how they handle families with non-custodial parents. So if you do have these types of less common situations in your family, then we are happy to talk about those unique circumstances and how that affects financial aid. Because I'll say it again, it's complicated and it really does vary a lot. So it's great to have these conversations before you start speaking to the school and taking the campus tours and looking at acceptance letters. It's good to know, what the school thinks you can afford and what you can actually afford. So that is an overview of both the FAFSA and the CSS profile. And just, I mentioned it earlier, but some schools may require things above and beyond these forms even. So for example, a lot of Ivy Leagues, so Harvard, Yale, they may ask for additional forms that they provide, so school-specific forms. They also, I believe, ask for your tax return and additional documentation information. So just again, things to keep in the back of your mind as you start building out the college list and seeing what your student, your child is interested in. Step 4, I'll hand it back to Jared.
Thanks, Lauren. So as we look at what we discussed already, we talked about need, we talked about cost of attendance, financial aid, deadlines, paperwork. And what we're going to touch upon now as we start to wrap up here are ways to increase your chances of getting a great aid package. And simply enough, it's a 5-point plan of attack. So one thing we would like to go over, or 5 things, let's say, is, how do you maximize your specific situation with your child? Colleges are not going to just look at the GPA or the SATs. Students need to showcase their extracurriculars outside of high school activities, awards, community engagements. This is the world in which everything is online now. It's not what it was 15, 20 years ago. They can Google your child, they can pull them up on Instagram and Facebook and see if they're a good fit for the college, and vice versa. So there needs to be a give and a take here. But don't be afraid to stand out to the college and demonstrate how and why your student would be a great fit, or even let your student be the leader of this and have them kind of show why they're a great fit. And don't be afraid to challenge the cost of the college and be persistent. This situation with the college is kind of like when you walk into a car dealership. You want to have a little power to negotiate the price of that car or get more bells and whistles from that car. It's no different with college. You don't need to have them or let them walk all over you. You can try to have this negotiation process and be prepared, which will only help reduce the cost of college. Perhaps let them see that your student belongs in that college versus a competitor. And in the end, it works out for both you financially, if you're paying for it, and your child who's getting a great degree at a college. So the art of negotiation has a lot of power here when it comes to a plan of attack. And again, as we stressed before and numerous times, every college is going to have their own plan of attack for you, and you need to just kind of have that readiness to be prepared for what to expect in that situation. But we can certainly help you throughout this process. So our focus today was to get your wheels spinning and to kind of demystify some of the financial aid process. There is much more that goes into college planning. Understanding your options will only help you and your student during this complex process. We are here to walk you through it every step of the way. We can give you clarity on the different areas of college planning. We have the software to show you examples, estimates, and college-specific information. And we will certainly, as Lauren said before, act as fiduciaries in your best interest every step of the way. And if you see the value in that type of scenario, then we certainly welcome you to just give us a call for a 20-minute complimentary consultation to discuss some of these topics, whether it's going over your expected family contribution, what the colleges would hypothetically cost, what your specific situation looks like. And I'll give you a great example, because a lot of this really narrows down to most kids don't know what they want to be when they grow up. Some do. But if your child said, well, I want to be a teacher. Well, if you want to be a teacher, do you need to go to an Ivy League school to get a degree that's going to pay you the same amount as a teacher that went to a state university? And that's certainly a discussion that needs to be had. And that's something we can kind of lay out and work with you on. Again, relating back to taking on student loans or taking on additional expenses. So if we look at kind of the next steps here, for your benefit, we have a nice fancy glossary with a lot of the lingo we laid out today. Our phone number is right there for you if you'd like to have a chat with me and Lauren. And Lauren, I'm going to throw it back over to you, as I believe we can open it up to some questions and answers now.
Yes, absolutely. So I'll just put our disclosures up here for a moment. So thank you so much. Thank you, Jared, and thank you everybody for joining us. We do have some questions that came through. So I saw some great conversation in the chat, so that's great to see. Lori asked, does UMass Amherst or Amherst College require home equity form? That's something that I don't know off the top of my head. That's one of those things that is school dependent. So I could absolutely, do some research and get back to you. As I said, I went to UMass Amherst, and I can say that when I went there, they did not require the home equity information. It was solely the FAFSA. And that's how a lot of state schools are. But I can't say for certain that's the case for every school. So a few other comments coming in about value schools and the CSS profile. Tammy said the CSS is invasive, but it can be very helpful. So you can get a lot of help from the school. So I would say it's definitely worth filling that out if it's required for your school. Try it for it not to be a deterrent, especially if your child is very interested in that school. And okay, we had a few questions come in, so I will go through these. Trevor asked, is it except 529? I think I know exactly what you're talking about. Let me go back to the slide. Apologize for scrolling quickly. So correct me if I'm wrong, Trevor, but I think you were referring to this slide. So and good point. So this means EX example. So the students' 529 plans are most commonly in the parent's name, right? The parent is usually the owner of the plan, and the student is the beneficiary. That's how it's structured. So this 529 plan is seen as a parent asset, which is more favorable, like we talked about, than having it be in the student's name. But just so you know, the 529s are viewed as a parent asset. They're not excluded from the picture or from the calculation, unfortunately, even though, and just to back up a second, for those who might not know what a 529 plan is, it is simply a college savings plan. So it's a type of investment account where you can save in a tax advantageous way for college. So if you're saving for your child or a family member, loved one to go to college or higher education, any form of higher education, the 529 is a good place to put money. It grows tax-free, and as long as you use it on qualified educational purposes, it is tax-free when you take it out of the 529. So a lot of tax benefits there. There may be a few more complexities that I'm not going into, but for the sake of this, I hope that answers your question. So 529s are seen as a parent asset. And is student income ceiling annual? Yes, the income allowance is annual. And John, nice to see you here. How far in advance of the student entering college should the FAFSA be submitted? So it is going to be submitted when they enter their senior year. So it's October of their senior year is when they can start submitting it. You have at least a few months, I believe it's until the end of June of the following year to submit it. And that goes for every year. So as I said, it's something that you need to submit each year. But it's that same time frame between October and June of each year. Life insurance payout to surviving other parent. Is that still an asset? Assume that is part of the color. So this person is asking, how is a life insurance payout viewed in terms of financial aid? So as we've said a whole bunch of times, it's going to vary by school, but most commonly that will be seen as either a source of income on your taxes or or an asset. So if you received a life insurance payout and you have it sitting in an investment account or in a savings account, that those dollars will be viewed in the formula. I know we're 2 minutes before 8 o'clock, so if anybody has to hop off, I understand. We will continue recording, and I'll just get through these last couple questions and we'll let you all go. So I hope that answered your question about the life insurance. And Jennifer asked, is there a sample CSS calculator online you can model? I don't know that off the top of my head, but I believe so. Let me pull back to the slide on the CSS. So the CSS profile, you can go to collegeboard.org, and that's website will have a lot more information than either Jared and I can even fathom about the CSS profile, but they would likely have either a sample calculator or at least more information as to how exactly it's calculated. And then you can use that to sort of gauge your what your expected family contribution would be. And we can help you a little bit with that too. John asked, what can you tell us about how parents' age plays into the calculation? So parents' age, Jared, do you have a comment on that?
I don't believe I've ever run into that situation, but it's certainly something we can look into.
Yes. Right. So the main thing that can play into is in the going back to the assets and the income. Of course, that's going to vary by age. And that's yet another thing that the schools may consider is things such as the age of the parent. They might view your situation differently. And again, I'll go back to the fact that you can appeal your financial aid award letter. So if there is a circumstance where perhaps parent is either older or younger than is not really an average or a typical, but say maybe that affects your financial situation. If that's the case, then you can use that to help support your appeal argument. So I know it's very vague, but John, we can absolutely get back to you too and have a one-on-one conversation if you'd like. Is there a list of value schools or a ranking? Jared, do you know if there was anywhere, did you come across a resource that listed value schools? It may just be simply doing some research.
Yeah, a lot of it was really research based because typically value schools is a very it's a broad term. So everyone has their own opinion on what a value school would be, but simply using the power of Google, you might be able to look at which would be considered a value school. And obviously the example we gave tonight was one of the most popular, but there are many out there.
Right, and it looks like that wraps up the questions that came in. Those were some really great questions. Thank you so much, everybody. And if I don't see anything else trickle in, now we're at 8:02. Thank you all so much for hanging out with us this evening. We really appreciate it. I know it's probably a little late for some of you, especially with young ones. So thank you very much for taking this time with us. So our contact information is here on the screen. This was recorded, so we will be sending you the presentation in an email in the next few days. We'll also be sharing it on our social media. So just be on the lookout for that. If there's anything you may have missed, or if you want to share this with somebody, another parent who's in the similar situation, and absolutely reach out to us. Use this as a resource. We're hoping that we can have more of these types of presentations going forward. It's a confusing topic, as you all know. You wouldn't be here if it was easy, right? We wouldn't be here, we wouldn't have a job. So we are happy to have these conversations and happy to be a resource for all of you. So thank you so much. Jared, did you want to add anything before we let everybody go?
Nope, hope everyone has a great evening. Thank you for joining, and we'll look forward to speaking with you soon.
All righty, thank you so much, everybody. Have a great night, evening, and we hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you.